All right, so welcome to a continuation session from the keynote for lunch. And this one's on allied intelligence sharing for proactive cybersecurity. Myself, I'll have the group here introduce themselves here in a second. But you'll see on the slides, actually, these are just infographics, so nothing really to follow along with. Most of this is going to be very conversational. We designed it to be coming from the keynote where people could ask more questions, anticipating there would be more than zero. And so myself, I'm Rob Lloyd. I'm from the city of San Jose. I'm the CIO. Raj?
Hi, my name is Raj Patel. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the city of Palo Alto.
Frank Grimmelmann, President and CEO of Arizona Cyberthreat Response Alliance, or ACTRA.
Dave Halla, Senior Advisor at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory.
Cool. And so what we're going to do is actually very conversational. We have some questions that, based on the session earlier, I'll ask the group, and we'll go from there. From there, if you guys have any questions, feel free to answer them, or ask them, and we'll answer. And then as people come in, hopefully from outside, we'll keep on having the conversation that way. So let's go ahead and start off, Dave, with a continuation of one of the themes that you have from your research. Is what did you find that differentiates the mature versus the loose alliances and information sharing when you did your research?
The number one was trust. That trust relationship that was developed in a mature relationship, in a mature organization. Once you start having that trust, you start getting that sharing. Because without that sharing, it almost comes across many times as, like when I was looking at the electricity ISAC, that it's kind of like we're standing up here lecturing, we're giving all this information back, but no one's giving us any information. So, we're gathering what we see and putting it out there, but we know people are having things that are happening, they're just not telling us about it. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to tailor things to what people's needs are. Whereas if you start sharing it, we can start seeing what's actually happening and start tailoring it more towards the needs of what the different organizations are or what they need.
So that's really telling. So if there is trust, then people do share. There's then a natural differentiation between the importance and urgency and patterns that you're going to see when people are sharing more. So can you talk about, like, in a loose affiliation versus a tight affiliation group where there is trust, what is the higher degree of emergencies or urgent actions or impacts or risks? Some examples that you might have seen.
So when you have trust, you actually get a whole lot of better data, more detailed stuff, because there's a way for you to go and reach out, talk to those folks individually, and say, okay, this is great. Could you provide me a little bit more information on this particular thing, or did you notice anything like here? It all depends on how it's coming in. There's more indicators, or there's more behaviors you might want to see than just a generic report. So that trust relationship gets you to that operational or actionable intelligence that you're trying to get to. Whereas without trust, it's like, oh, we had a spear phishing email. Here was the email address, and it came from this IP.
Okay, and so when there is that trust and that level of conversation, are there any pain points that emerge because of the volume that comes across, or any barriers that you then have to solve because there is so much sharing?
Yes, because it becomes then a function of how many analysts do you have in the background to accumulate all the data.
Okay.
So when I gave the example of GridX 2015, where we erred on our scenario side for cyber and didn't, if you choose this, okay, here's some of the information or indicators for this particular adversary, that would have helped us. We actually, in our minds, we had 3 different threats. Instead, we got 69 different types of threats because we did not script the exercise properly on what was shared. So, and if you're dealing with 69 different types of attacks nationwide coming in within 3 hours, it can be pretty overwhelming because you don't even have the research put a single analyst on every single issue to deal with.
To overwhelm the network.
Yeah.
And Frank, if you want to dive into that one, but also, so Johns Hopkins, the research identified ACTRA is one of the leading models, the way it's built. So if you can talk about, maybe speak to or add on what Dave mentioned, but also since you have been successful for about 6 years, how is ACTRA built and that you think it makes it so successful?
Nothing like a short question.
No, not at all.
I think what I'd like to do is add on to Dave's from a slightly different tack, and that is automated information sharing. ACTRA was one of the first in the United States to have what's called Styx taxi, meaning a new protocol, including a transportation protocol, for directly taking feeds out of the NCIC, National Cyber Information Center, which is DHS's umbrella. Overall, it's cyber. Most of you would know it as US CERT and other areas within it. And taking automated feeds, what we saw then and what we see now is a tremendous amount of white noise. So what we do is utilize that to create the haystack, if you will. And what we're looking for among our member organizations, predominantly through crowdsourcing, is the needle in the haystack. So the more you automate, you have to be very cautious because there's not much value that comes out of simply flooding yourself through a fire hose. You really need to differentiate what's actionable and separate the wheat from the chaff. On that same note, when we take a look at what differentiates ACTRA, why it succeeded, and correcting one thing, I think Dave said it's the only model in the United States that accomplishes the integration across all areas of private, public, law enforcement, intelligence, and DoD, along with our academic institutions. What really differentiates it, we began with a value proposition. Most of you are well aware that everything in a business or in a government entity is driven by the objectives of that business entity, beginning with a strategic plan, going to your operational plans, your budgets, and so forth. What really differentiates us is keeping that focus of how do you make a difference. What appalls me, because I chair nationally the Information Sharing and Analysis Organization at University of San Antonio, Texas, is that everybody is talking about information sharing. If you are doing strict information sharing, there's not much business value. So we began, building on what Dave said, to look at three key pillars that we had to build upon. Number one was trust. If you go in and you create all the infrastructure and nobody puts anything into it, you're not going to get anything out of it. So trust and culture. Silicon Valley, you hear it all the time with Apple and so many others. You have to zero in on the culture you're creating to engage the people, not so they're believing in your idea, but so it becomes our idea. And if we all engage people, and it's a people issue, it's not a technology issue, then you have the key foundation. However, we're dealing in cyber, meaning we operate at or near the speed of light all the time. And as a result, you have to have technological integration to be able to tie together operationalized, actionable threat intelligence directly to the defense systems. So within ACTRA, all of our member organizations at no cost have the ability to integrate the threat intelligence totally under their control to their defense systems directly. And we've even worked with major SIM manufacturers to create very advanced bidirectional APIs to accommodate that. Thirdly, if you have kids and you have a 16-year-old who wants to drive, that's the thing of the past, I understand, nobody wants to drive now. But it used to be when we were about to turn 16, you buy a car, then the day you turn 16, you get your driver's license. But if you give that young person, because you have the resources to do so, a Lamborghini, and you point them to a racetrack and you throw them the keys, you're going to have a real problem. It's not going to be a pretty outcome because you haven't taught them how to utilize the tools at their disposal. So think of it as a microcosm of defense in depth. It was stated today during the keynote, and I think very clearly, that as you add layers of defense and the complexity of the interrelationships of those, as you upgrade one, what happens to the next? You are potentially not only doing yourself a disservice, but actually increasing your attack surface. So you have to think through wisely, what technology do I bring in? How do I integrate that intelligently? And most importantly, given change management, how do I coordinate change to allow that to occur? So we found workforce development to be the most important and essential component. During the main plenary event, I discussed a bit of what we're doing with the Chamber of Commerce. I chair their cybersecurity talent pipeline. We are leveraging both private and public working together between our businesses, our government entities, and our educational institutions. We're tying together DoD pipelines of talent. Fort Huachucas in Arizona, what better intelligence officers could you bring into private and public sector to fill threat intelligence jobs and to retain them within the state? Beyond that, though, with the cybersecurity academies, we have 300-hour embedded member training programs where we're creating a network to defeat a network. We're training people on how to utilize threat intelligence and then continuing to give them visibility across all the sectors of our members, firewalled even from their own companies, to not be able to share something unless by policy or exception they're authorized to do so, because we have to protect the anonymity of our member organization's source of data unless they allow us to share with attribution. So those three things really become the core. You have to think in terms of the culture and the people, just as though you were doing a Silicon Valley startup. Secondly, the technology to operationalize in a real-time or near real-time basis. And then thirdly, zeroing in on the key component, and that is people. And until artificial intelligence advances to a level to be able to fill or even complement that third area successfully, the people become the most important part of the equation.
That's awesome. So, Raj, to take this to the level of a premier mid-sized city is when you have that kind of flow, that kind of input, that kind of integration and trust and sharing, how do you practically apply that to get ahead of the curve in an operating basis for a city and utility?
Right, so it's a right question, Rob, because we have cities information security infrastructure and we have utility infrastructure as well. So little over 5 years ago when I joined the city of Palo Alto, there was no history of security officer. And when I approached different department, like utility department and other department, they said that city was running without security officer from more than 100 years. We really don't worry about it. So that was the culture then. And so start building a awareness culture is the number one thing, because it's all about people. Because in security business, as you know, that people is the weakest link in the information security chain, right? So what I have done is people, process, and technology approach. So from the people perspective, we have institutionalized a process of offering information security awareness training, not only for city's employee, but next month, like Cybersecurity Month, every October is a National Cybersecurity Month. So what we do in the month of October, we host a cybersecurity awareness sessions at the library on weekly basis for all the 4 weeks. Community members are invited, people are invited, city's employees can also join, and we bring cybersecurity awareness. Now, from last 3-4 years, as you can know, as you have noticed, that more and more local government agencies are also being victim of cyber threat and so on and so forth. So now people are taking security seriously, not only from their work environment perspective, but from their personal life perspective also. Like think about last week event, people's security, people's credit report get compromised and private data get compromised and so on, Equifax scenario I'm mentioning. So people are taking security seriously now. So that's from the people perspective. Now from the process perspective, what we have done is that we have established a information security steering committee where each department director are part of that forum. And we meet quarterly basis and tell them that this is the cybersecurity framework we are going to deploy. This is 4 years ago prior to deploying. We have educated them, taken their input, and we made sure that this is their process, this is their framework, this is not my framework. And we created trust among the director of each department. And from the utility perspective, Rob, we have created SCADA RAID team. The RAID team for SCADA is that each critical resources or stakeholder like gas, electric, water, and wastewater, we have identified 2 people from each area and created a RAID team kind of forum. And we have conducted the cybersecurity assessment and find out what are the gaps, and then develop a information security threat management framework. And then it's called SCADA framework. It's a Department of Energy, DOE, has a dedicated framework for cybersecurity for critical infrastructure only. So we have conducted risk assessment based on that framework, and now from last couple of years, we are in the process of implementing all the root cause corrective action process. So we are 50% done, we are still continuing. So that's how we have done, people, process, and technology.
Okay. And so Frank, let's approach it from a different angle. This almost sounds like a dream and too good to be true, right? The sharing, the concepts, they're very high-minded. Can you take us down into the practical impact of a true sharing model? Can it impact you where you're getting intelligence that no one has? Can it really give you forewarning that we don't normally get? Can it help with 0 days? What does it really help with?
Yeah, I'll actually share some use cases that take us from the theoretical to the practical at a grassroots level. I think, first of all, as we talked about in the plenary session, we had, just as one example, approximately 6 or 7 0-day or near 0-day that were identified among our member organizations, meaning not on VirusTotal, anywhere in the literature, anything else.
So before common knowledge,
Before, I'm talking about real time. It was not out there, it was not showing up on any databases, et cetera. Along with that, when I use the term near 0-day, you may see on VirusTotal, which is a way to check, what's known, essentially that one of the AV vendors has identified something, but none of the others have pushed it out into the database or given it to the ISP, so it's not being blocked. That's what I refer to as a near 0-day. And so we see those. What I'm going to do now is I'll give you one example and then share with you how we accomplish that. So on a 0-day, I shared the state of Arizona Russian attack at the plenary session. So what I want to share with you is another case where we had a member organization that had been attacked, and one of the things that we saw emerge that we had not seen before was encrypted attachments of Java code that were effectively obfuscated and hard to discern to Word documents. This came about, probably any of you operationally saw some of this earlier this year. When that occurred, one of our member organizations, first to be attacked, actually reverse engineered the obfuscated Java code in order to be able to identify it. We had another member organization and several others that were attacked. When they were attacked, and these were things getting through the defense systems, actually being delivered in a manner where they were having impact. They were randomly, doing some encryption of data. It was a totally destructive malware. We could not see any motive for it. It was not criminally motivated, certainly wasn't nation state motivated, and it was going across multiple sectors. So when the second organization was attacked, my view of sharing is the first organization within 10 minutes of notification indicated, we have figured out the reversal, would you like the script? And shared it out, meaning they did not have to go to backup because several of their endpoints had been fully encrypted as a result of it, as well as several servers. So to me, that is what becomes operational. The way we handle that, I worked for Mayor Frank Jordan's office, setting up the Department of Mayor's Office of Children, Youth, and their Families back in the 90s under Prop J. They had some funding. And we went out to all...
And this was San Francisco?
Pardon?
This was San Francisco?
Yeah, city of San Francisco. Couldn't make it to San Jose back then. But
It was still unaffordable.
what I did was take a year's sabbatical, and we were trying to put to work funds to bring together 600 fragmented agencies. So we took a very novel approach. We said any proposal in response to our RFP had to include in it collaboration. And whenever you're writing a grant, you always want to know, what does that mean? When you're saying collaboration, what are you asking me for? And our response was very simple. We're not going to tell you. We want you to tell us. And we had some of the most creative proposals by empowering people to empower themselves. So the approach we've taken, given where we are in terms of, defense in depth, in terms of artificial intelligence, everything, is to realize that the greatest intelligence after you automate what you can in your defenses is really the people. How many of you are IT operations or security in a operating environment, okay? So if I say to you, tell me the interesting things that are happening in your environment. You know your baseline, you know what's hitting you every day. When all of a sudden something different hits, that's what I want to know about. That's what we want to share with the other members. So what we do, take a look at the Boston bombing. How did we solve that? Was that incredible work in forensics or anything scientific by the FBI? No. It was an argument between law enforcement agencies where they leaked out to the press, Sinai and his brother, and essentially crowdsourced to the public. Within a matter of hours, they were able to identify the person they brought down. And how many lives would have been lost were that not the case? So we do the same thing in cybersecurity. You know your environment, I don't. But if I say to you what's interesting, what's different, so the kinds of things that we've seen that pop out with that kind of an equation are, example, ransomware, et cetera, that's a dime a dozen, we see it every day, extortion notes and so forth. But what's different is when you see ransomware prior to it going to Bitcoin, targeting a real bank account. Among our members, we go across 14 sectors and we have representation in 5 states. We had a member who was private sector, working with all the major banks, who within 15 minutes of identifying real wire to numbers could tell us who owned the account, when it was opened, and the balances in it. And we could operate against that either to monitor it or to go against it. Another good example, during the elections, we picked up a single IP address. It was out of a Midwestern city, government entity, said they saw some unusual activity from this, then put it aside saying this really has nothing to do with the election. Gut feeling, I was in the counterterrorism center monitoring at that moment, and something, you know how something just hits you, intuition? Ladies understand women's intuition. Something just hit me, and I ran it against our database. We popped immediately an address in China that's real, and it's one of the government-sponsored agencies. We then put that out across our member base, crowdsourcing. Within a matter of minutes, we knew that 12 of our sectors were all under attack from the same IP. So when they began to run the logs behind that, we not only knew they were under attack, we know that it had been for a period of up to 2 to 3 years in some cases. It was always a low-level SYN scan. The SYN scans were coming in targeting remote access ports, but effectively as soon as they determined that the ports were locked down, then they dropped immediately into the mapping of the architecture. So save it for a rainy day. If you can't get through the back door now, let's save it for a later date when we have maybe a kinetic activity, physical attack on the United States, and then we want to utilize that information against them. So our belief, again, in people is so powerful. And where we get all of the automated from MSISAC, from NKIC, all of those things we get as automated feeds. The real power is in the people differentiating the white noise from that kernel that is the 0-day or the near 0-day.
Cool. And so, Dave, from the research you've done and that national view that you have and the education view that you have, what are the talent struggles that a lot are facing, and what are you seeing being the tactics and approaches that help solve that puzzle?
Probably the biggest challenge on the defense side is not having an understanding of the offense side. So if you've never played with Kali Linux or a Metasploit and you're a defender and someone is using one of those tools against you, you have no idea how to react. Some of that stuff is automated, some of it's not. But when people are trying to do a DDoS against you, do you know how to break apart a DDoS? Because if you understand the method that they're using for the DDoS, and there's different types of ways to do a DDoS, you can come up with ways to block it or disable it so that it's not overwhelming your system. But you have to have that understanding.
Mm-hmm. So how are people picking up these skills? Because you're actually talking about various levels of skill. You're talking about just an operating understanding. You're talking about knowledge all the way to TTPs and forensics. So what are you seeing as the organizations that, when you look nationwide, really shine as they've got a handle on how to develop their talent to do this better?
ACTRA is the only one that has a cyber warfare range where they actually teach people how to hack, and from there they start learning how to defend. So they know what a hacker is looking for, know what the type of attack would look like, so they can go back to their network and look for those specific things that are happening within their network. If you don't have that, you don't know how to defend. Additionally, there's also the ability with their warfare range, if you're curious about how well a certain security product can set up, they can go and create a virtual environment, a virtual network, and put these security products on there, and then you can go to town trying to attack it or having other folks attack it. So you kind of assess it that way, see how it would really defend against your network and push that information out. It's those types of things. We talk about even on the military side is that if you just rely on automation and you don't understand the stuff behind it, it's not good, because automation will eventually fail you. Something's not going to quite work right. And if automation fails you and you don't have the manual methods to look for things, you're just basically owned.
Because that's interesting. Most of us think of those skills as discrete things, right? We're going to build around a framework, an ISO framework or a NIST framework, and we're going to get certified CISAs and CISSPs and certified ethical hackers. And those things are important because they give you a framework to work around. But you're telling us a different message, that the malicious actors aren't going to follow your frameworks and your traditional engineering methodologies. They're going to come at you with any kind of tool. So the only place that you can really see that is in a warfare range, and getting good opponents.
Not only good opponents, but also stepping outside of the framework, stepping outside of the box. So we teach cookie cutter methods.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if everything's cookie cutter, then you can figure out, how would I attack this? I mean, so part of it is understanding dependencies. So when you're looking in a military environment and you're looking at your adversary, you're trying to map out their critical dependencies. So if they decide to conduct action against you, you know some of their key points that if you take those out, it's going to degrade their capabilities. Well, we try to tell people, it's called mission dependency modeling, is look inward. What are those key points that if someone goes there would affect you? Because obviously your adversaries are going to be inside and they're going to enumerate your network and they're going to know your network better than you are.
Okay.
But if you think about it, your best people are your people. So if I ask the people is like, get a group of people from different levels in the company. So if I was going to do a cyber attack against our company here, how would you do it? And start asking them. If they've never had any offensive, they won't think about it. But if they've had some experience, it's like, how would you do it?
Okay.
What are the key things that are out there that, so do we have the tools to look at that and protect against it?
That's
Maybe
a good segue. So just to make sure I leave enough time for questions for the crowd is, very quickly, what is the one thing about cybersecurity that scares you most, each of you, and what might we be able to do to ally to answer that need? So let's start with you, Raj.
Yeah, so as you have alluded earlier, that what keep me up at night is that the bad guys or non-ethical hackers they all know.
It's so
that-
kind.
They
We
all
call them
know
criminals.
that what kind of framework normal organizations have deployed, like either it is ISO 27001 or NIST or whatnot, right? So you have to think like them in order to stay ahead of them. And what we have done at the city of Palo Alto, we'd like to tell our story that you have to deploy a next generation cybersecurity framework, and which is a recently Department of Homeland Security has developed a next generation cybersecurity framework, which is identify, detect, and response. It is a combination of NIST, ISO 27001, risk assessment framework, which is ISO 33001, and so on and so forth. So it's a combination of a 4-directional cybersecurity framework, which allows you to find out that where exactly is the attack is coming from. But in addition to that, what are the predictive assessment they have done so that you can identify this kind of cyber attack in the future. So that's called predictive cyber security. And that is the model we are moving forward with. We have Darren over here from our organization, Joel Dino. We have recently deployed, I'm not going to give too much out, otherwise people will read this video and try to find out that how we can attack them. But we have deployed a innovative technology so that within few seconds of attack happens, Darren and I both get text messages, and we get on the case of putting protective environment around it.
Okay. How about you, Frank?
What scares me the most is human nature. Two things I'll preface my comment why. Two things people hate the most are the way things are and any suggestion of change. And people are very resistant to change because we're all in our comfort zone of what we know. Therefore, we continue to do things the same way. What concerns me more than anything is continuing that paradigm. Right now, I would submit to you that we are continuing in our intelligence agencies with compartmentalization to do things the same way that we did in World War II, where you had a file drawer and you could compartmentalize because there were only a couple of keys to a locker. The challenge with that today is when we take a look at what's going on in our colleges and universities, we have the majority of our students who are in the graduate programs in computer science and engineering, foreign national students that are not U.S. citizens. 60% is the number in the state of Arizona. So if we are graduating students and we do not have an immigration policy that aligns to retain that brain talent within the United States, I would submit that we are putting ourselves at a severe disadvantage, particularly if a number of those students are from countries that may or may not be friendly towards our ideology, beliefs, and views. More so, we have these same students who essentially are then able, if they do get a green card, are able to remain in the United States to work for all of the infrastructure we depend upon. What's wrong with this picture where the universities, to drive revenue, are taking in students that are putting it at a national security disadvantage? So what concerns me is that we don't change the way things are being done. We continue to do things the same way. Another real quick example is the classification of information as a classified piece of information. Let's take the hack we had recently where the shadow brokers were attacked and NSA and CIA tools were leaked, and then people used them initially during WannaCry and Petya, or as it became known, not Petya, directly against the National Health Service in Britain. There's a perfect example of convergence of physical and cyber threatening life. And if you have a clearance, you are not able to utilize that data. If I go into the dark net with a clearance, try to grab the information so I can reverse engineer the malware, I lose my clearance. Whereas the enemy has no such restrictions. They have a marketplace like Amazon, and they can pick it up totally themselves. What's wrong with this equation? It takes me back to Vietnam. You're much too young to remember that, but I do. And in that war, we were asked to win a war, but fight with our hands behind our back. You can't do that and hope to succeed. So resistance to change and perpetuation of institutions and culture that create silos, in my view, directly play into the hands of the enemy.
And Dave, sorry to do this to you. 1 minute, can you?
As I can do it. So my biggest, the part that I think is humorous, and I'll give a quick story on it. 80% of all cyber attacks are through spear phishing because humans are your weakest link in any organization. So I talked to a bunch of CEOs on distribution, large public distribution entities, and I said, what in your business process requires you to allow everyone to have internet access? And, and they said, we would have a riot on our hands if we blocked social media. I'm like, so why don't you take a look at who needs internet access for their job? Take that out of your network and have it facing. Take everyone else, give them a separate Chromebook and have a network that is completely separate. So if they see something on the internet they really need, they can email it to themselves. And so the only thing going in and out of your network is email, because now you're only looking at one vector. And if you've done that, then you just reduced your aperture by over 80% when it comes to security. Now you have a chance to stay ahead of the curve. But if you have everyone being able to reach the internet and everyone having email access, that's the number one way that everyone's getting in and doing it.
All right. So let me, before I open it up, the reality is we have about 93,000 local governments, right? If you count state, local districts. 80% of them are communities of under 60,000 people. So staying ahead of the curve for the advanced people who have resources and the knowledge is one thing, but we have to realize that we have a lot of friends and neighbors that are in organizations that are really struggling. They don't even know what they don't know. And so how can we protect everyone? Because we know from a lot of what we've learned in cybersecurity is where but for grace go I. A lot of the impacts that they face will eventually hit us somewhere in the stream. So with that, we are all in it together, and there is a call to action here, but what questions might you guys have? All right, Joel, go ahead.
Well, in one of the slides, it says careless insider or criminal insider. So, that carbon-based security factor is one of the weakest links. So, are there what sort of initiatives are there to monitor and educate these people? So, educate the careless and monitor the potential malicious criminal insiders without violating their civil rights.
Well, I'll give you a good story. So several years back.
Oh, sorry, just to reiterate the question is,
Next room.
is everyone okay?
That worries you.
How do we combat the carbon-based human problems where someone's just doing something careless or silly or even malicious?
So several years back, NSA conducted a spear phishing campaign to get people for spear phishing awareness. They spent a week of just constantly reminding people everything about spear phishing. 2 weeks later, they did a test, and they had a 60% click rate. And you would think those people should know better. My point is that we can do education and everything like that, but depending on how you operate, when it comes to the human, there's going to be errors. So how do you combat that? When I've given talks, I've said, basically, and I've talked to offensive operators, 99% of all attacks are insider attacks. Let me clarify that. What is an insider attack? It could be someone who works inside your organization, or it could be someone using legitimate credentials to do bad things inside your organization. It is someone, unless they've created new accounts, it is someone's accounts inside your organization. So are you tracking that? Are you looking at people who are logging in after hours when they normally shouldn't? Because is it really them, or is it someone else?
And again, align that with the silo talk. If the only thing you're protecting is your perimeter, you're highly subject to a problem. What you need to do is be protecting your supply chain as well as your infrastructure that you rely upon. big issue in Arizona are California earthquakes. That might surprise you. But if you have a major earthquake here, similar to what just happened in Mexico or other areas around the world historically, we're going to have a mass migration. We have about a 3-day food supply in Arizona because we get a lot out of your ports. So if California ports close down, we've got 3 days to remedy it somehow. If our population suddenly doubles, it's even more of a problem because now we're at 1.5 days. So the key is we're all in this together. I want to go back to your community theme. And the way we can get around it is by working with one another. If they want to phish you, they do such good analysis and target it so well, it'll seem like it's coming from your own payroll department about your current raise. And it's how do you go against that? When it's coming from the city of Palo Alto going to the city of San Jose, and it's a legitimate address, it's not domain or typo squatting, how do you determine that it's not really coming from city of Palo Alto? So the key ingredient to me, again, becomes sharing with one another, and that is the greatest defense given the state of the industry today.
I'd like to add a little bit. The cybersecurity awareness is like an educational program. Like you don't wake up one day and you become PhD. You have to go to elementary school, middle school, high school, and then go to college and university and so on and so forth. My thinking process is similar way. Like you cannot just educate the city employees all of a sudden just giving them one cybersecurity course and they all become expert. You have to take a gradual approach, meaning what we have done and we are in the process of doing is that once we offer cybersecurity training, we are going to have a program like we are going to have mock-up phishing attack. We'll identify that who are the people are really clicking on the emails or the mock-up test. Identify those people without embarrassing them, take them to the next level. And the people who are already aware, give them a different kind of training because you cannot just keep on giving them same kind of training year over year over year. You have to identify that, okay, Joel is graduated now, so he's going to go to the different kind of training. So you have to develop a group of people or class of people who are at a different level, depending upon their access requirement. Like people who are operating or managing your data center, they need different kind of training versus the people are just using the internet to do their time card. So you have to work smart with the people in order to educate them, and then you can expect the result.
Okay. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I had a question, like, actually I have a few questions, but what you just said kind of answered my second question. Well, my first question,
Because I was reading your mind.
yeah, exactly, I think so. My second question, what I'm going to ask now is, like, how come the industry doesn't develop, like, certain things like making cybersecurity not as daunting or boring to some people that they have to review a lot of the just policy-based, the frameworks, and as Dave mentioned, like, there's a lot of cookie cutters out there. How do you think outside of the box? But as you were saying, like, you do a different approach for some people. They will, click on those phishing email very easy, and the other people who are a little bit more security aware, they will have a different set. So you cannot use one approach for all. So that kind of is good.
So just
I
to,
think there
oh, sorry, go ahead.
should be some type of more interesting things, like that's one of the things that I would be interested. I'm not actually a security personnel for us. I'll basically do the virtualization. But I'm interested in learning more about security. But if you're one person wearing many different hats, another area that you want to get into, it has to really interest you, not just like that you have to do it. You
Right, right.
So So let me paraphrase and just give a chance to answer the question. So why aren't there more adaptive ways that help people learn this better rather than repetitive of the same old that's not really helping?
So let me
Sure.
respond to this. It's a great question, and I like to tell our success story. So I'm going to relate that what we are doing to do that. Every year during the Cybersecurity Month, we are offering a interesting cybersecurity game-based training. Like for next month, we are going to have a cybersecurity educational program where people will have contests. Like last year, we have a Jeopardy game. Like people answer question and then a winner gets prize and so on and so forth. So this year, we are going to have different kind of game. So it will be more critical or more hard questions than last year. But we are providing this kind of training to utility red team people, utility people, general people, and we are doing some event like this in collaboration with Stanford University and VMware. So there are 4 or 5 different sessions during the Cybersecurity Month at different level. So what that is doing is like providing gamification of education or doing gamification of education not only interests them, but they are getting excited to join. And that's number one. Number two is collaborating with different entities, because City of Palo Alto has only limited amount of knowledge. So that's why we are collaborating with Stanford University, VMware, and HP. So people will have different kind of angle and different kind of teaching. So that's what we do.
And I apologize, I'd love for Frank and Dave to answer, but we are out of time. So if you have any other questions, just email Raj, and he will answer them all. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.